Hi, this is Rabbi Orlofsky, and welcome to the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. And whether you're watching with our friends and our producers over at Torah Anytime, or wherever you watch or listen to your podcast, as always, it's wonderful to have you along for the experience. Yeah? Let's start with our sponsorship, Elazar and Yehuda. I'd like to thank Rabbi Orlofsky and the team, because it is a team. I don't do this myself. Otherwise, you would see me holding my, one of those little phones up and, talking to it. Yeah. For the effort they put into the show. Both myself and my father really enjoy listening to the show while we work. Oh, Hashem. Myself and my brother would like to sponsor this episode in honor of our dear parents, Meya Yol Ben Kila Masha and Bela Bas Kila. Wow, very nice. Well, you can't do much better than sponsoring an episode as a Hakar Satov to your parents. And what a beautiful, beautiful thing that is. And as I was reading over the dedication, I have to say that it inspired me for what I'm going to speak about now. And let me give an introduction to what it is I want to talk about by saying the following. Lahavdil, I don't mean to compare myself, but I was in a shir by Rabbi Moshe Shapiro, and I felt like he had said this shir over, it was a shir on Isru Chag, actually, and I felt like he had said this shir over the year before. And Yosef Brown, so Zayge Stark, who went for many years and was a very close Talmud of Rabbi Moshe. I was a dilettante by comparison. I said to him, he said this shir last year, and he said, no, last time he said it from this bechina, and this time he's saying it from this bechina. It was a different perspective. That was lost on somebody like me who lacks a certain subtlety, but he explained it that way. And then he looked at me and he said, a painter has only so many colors to work with, but he can paint endless pictures. I loved that mashal. I loved it then and I love it now because it's such a beautiful idea. There's many different variations on themes that you can give. And even though you might be talking only about one particular topic, but there's many different ways of dealing with it. I'll tell you another Rabbi Brown moment that I had. I'm not that versed in Kabbalistic concepts, but I at least know the spheres, right? And I know that the spheres correspond to people. Avraham is Chesed, and Yitzchak is Gevura, and Yaakov is Tiferes, and Moshe is Netzach, and Aaron is Hod, and Yosef is Yisayin, and Dovid is Malchus, right? Okay. So I was in this shir, Mishlei, with the Gra that Rabbi Moshe was giving, and he gave a whole shir explaining how Avram was Tiferes. The next week, he explained how Aaron was Tiferes. The third week, he explained how Yosef was Tiferes. Now, I'm really confused at this point, because I know that Yaakov is Tiferes. So I went over to Rabbi Brown, and I said to him, how could everybody be Tiferes except for Yaakov, who actually is Tiferes? And he says to me, David, you know, in Sfiras HaOmer, there's Chesed, Chesed Sheba Gevura, Chesed Sheba Tiferes, Chesed Sheba Netzach. You know that there's Hod, Hod Sheba Chesed, Hod Sheba Gevura, etc. All the different combinations. He was explaining the aspect of Tiferes in the Midah of Chesed and Tiferes in the Midah of Yisaid. Well, that I completely missed that, obviously. But the point was that there's only so many combinations and things you can deal with, but there's endless understandings and possibilities that you can get out of them. Yeah, and you can keep getting different ideas. I mention this because when I speak, I'm always keenly aware of the fact that there is a cadre of people out there, the exact number I don't know, but I've met at least 24 of them who have committed to memory everything that I've ever said. I haven't committed to memory everything I've ever said. I don't even know what I'm talking about most of the time. So I'm always nervous when I'm going to speak about a topic because I'm pretty sure I must have talked about it beforehand. But I use this as an introduction. I assume it'll be a variation on a theme to talk about in a slightly different direction. And so hopefully if you have heard some of these ideas before, you'll indulge me. But especially when I see people who are sponsoring an episode in honor of their parents. And this is what brought me to this topic. We're in Yemos HaMashiach. This is not me saying it. Much bigger people than me have said it. When Reb Chaim Kanievsky was still alive, I know somebody who brought his Talmidim to him. And they asked him, is Mashiach coming? And he looked at them and said, no, he's outside knocking on the door. Understand? That's how close he is. And all you have to do is look at the disintegration of society, because the last Mishnah in Sotah discusses what the world is going to be like when Mashiach comes. And one of the aspects of that is the fact that there's going to be a general breakdown of society. And so people will not respect Talmidei Chachamim. The young will not respect the old. Children will treat their parents with disrespect. And suddenly, children will consider themselves as if they are the authorities. So, people who are alive today, who are under 30, they may not even understand what this means. Okay? I grew up in the 60s and 70s. There was still a tzura of society. Yeah, I never called my parents friends by their first name. It was Mr. This, or Mrs. This, or Miss That, or Doctor This, or Rabbi That. But I would never call one of my father's friends, Steve. Hey, Steve, my father's friend. He's an adult. I remember when I was in shul, there was a balabas there, and a guy who, he was already in Yeshiva Gedola, he wasn't a kid, and he mentioned to this fellow, he says, well, his name wasn't Steve, but I'll take Steve. Steve, he goes, Steve, who do you think you are? You don't talk to me that way, you're a kid. And the guy was taken aback, and I was like, woo. Because to me, I knew that already. You don't talk to somebody, if you're a kid, that way. You treat your elders with respect. You speak to them respectfully. That was a given. Everyone knew that. It was the way you spoke to a teacher. There was a limit to how much chutzpah would be tolerated, even in public schools. It was the way you spoke to an adult and the way you understood you were a kid. So perhaps the dictum, children should be seen and not heard, is a little severe. But certainly the idea that you're a kid. You're a kid. And I'm always amazed over the years when I would see kids who didn't appreciate this. So this story is maybe 30 years old. And I was sitting at my Shabbos table. I had a number of yeshiva boys over for the Suda. And I don't remember, somebody asked my advice on a particular idea about a yeshiva and this and that. And I was giving my advice, and this kid said, no, that's wrong. And he starts spouting, And I start engaging with him, and he's very dismissive of what I'm saying. And finally I said, how old are you? And he was, I said, no, how old are you? 17 years old. I said, it could be that by nothing else, just the fact that I'm more than twice your age, I may have picked up a few things along the way. It's a possibility. Why would you be dismissive of somebody who has been around longer than you. There is something to be said for that. Afilu kolonim chachamim, kolonim levonim, kolonim zakenim, kolonim yodim es Torah. Right? What's zakenim? It means you have life experience. Even universities recognize that you can get credits based on life experience, that you have experienced things in life that should help you gain a greater understanding. Steve Jobs was a college dropout. So at some point he went back to get his master's in computer engineering. Steve Jobs. He graduated with a C. This is the man who invented Apple computers. But maybe if nothing else, just over the years, he may have picked up a few tricks along the way, building a billion-dollar corporation that develops computers. So I've seen this throughout the years, and I've always been amazed in it, and I really sat down and thought about it when I saw this. I decided I wanted to speak about this. And to me, the face of this is a girl by the name of Greta Thunberg. She's Swedish. And when she was a teenager, she decided to get up and speak in public forums to establish green policy. And, she had this famous phrase, "How dare you, destroy our world, and what do we do?" Okay, she's autistic, but she's a kid. And why in the world do you think you know anything? I started in NCSY in Los Angeles. I had a chapter in Los Angeles. And me and my friend Shilin First, over Shalom, we got together to make our own Shabbaton. Outside of the province, just between our two chapters. We happened to have the two biggest chapters in the region. We wanted to get together. We went away to a camp. It was very special. I had everything all worked out, and technically it was a disaster, but that's not important now. But it was the first time I was running an educational program at a Shabbaton. And I started off with sort of a trigger thing, and they went into four, what they call in NCSY, I don't know what they call it now. Back then they used to call it educational sessions, right? Which were little discussion groups with people. And they were led by four completely different people. One person did a classic educational session. When I used to teach in Olagola, I would teach them how to prepare and give over an educational session. You raise points, you have a discussion, you bring in back and forth, So one person gave the standard one. Another guy was unnecessarily aggressive. He was yelling and fighting with everybody, and everyone was screaming at him. He was screaming back. Another person, because remember this was California, was doing more like an est session where everyone was sharing their feelings on the topic and how they felt and how this makes you feel and things, And one person just gave a lecture. There was no discussion whatsoever. So I asked each one of them, the guy who gave the standard session, I said to him, "Why'd you do it that way?" And he says, "Well, that's how you're supposed to give an educational session." I had nothing to say. The guy who did the touchy-feely thing, I said, "Why'd you do it that way?" And he said, "Because the purpose of the educational program is to get the people to express how they feel. That's what's important. The most important thing is that they feel they've been heard and validated." And okay. The guy who was fighting with everybody, I said, "Why'd you do it that way?" He says, "Because people love controversy." He says, "And you watch. These kids are going to follow me around yelling at me the whole Shabbos." And they did. For the rest of Shabbaton, when they saw him, they'd go over and they'd start screaming at him, and he'd scream back at them. Very engaging. The person who just gave a straight lecture, I said to him, why did you do that? And he said, what do I need to hear what they think? They're wrong. They don't know. I do know. The purpose of a class is to teach, not to set people up to give wrong answers. So the more time I spend teaching them the correct point of view is time I don't waste listening to them tell me the wrong point of view. This was 1978, and I thought, wow, what an interesting approach. Because in the 1960s, there were campus uprisings. And the students made sit-ins in the offices and all kinds of things. They went on strike. They demanded changes in the university program. We don't want to learn this. We don't want to learn that. We don't want this. We don't want that. And the universities gave in. I, of course, would have said, you have 10 minutes to clear out this room or you're all expelled. You are students in a university with trained professors. You are here to learn. You are not here to dictate what you're going to learn. But that was it. That was the beginning of the disintegration of the university. And the students decided what we will learn and what we won't will learn and how we're going to do it. So the evolution of this was eventually we have characters like Greta Thunberg, who are dumb kids standing up and getting attention. And because these people are dying for attention, and this is, of course, what TikTok does. Anybody could get on TikTok, say any stupid thing they want, and get an enormous amount of people to listen to them. And they might be the biggest idiots in the world. Sometimes they definitely are. And it's absolutely amazing. And then they're going to set the agenda for society. What kind of craziness is that? Where do they come off to being able to say what... You have to know something. I don't know who said it once. Somebody attributed it to me, but I'm pretty sure I never said it. I could be wrong, but I've heard more than one person attribute it to me. I don't ever remember saying it. They said, you're just brainwashing us. And presumably what I said is, I'm looking for your brain. If I find it, I'll try to wash it. But right now, I can't even locate it. Yeah? So I don't ever remember saying something like that. It doesn't sound like me at all. It sounds much too harsh. I would have said something much more clever, like, be quiet, you dummy. But people have an opinion. And that's why when you watch what's going on around the world today, it's kids who are out of control. Now, let's go back. Yeah? There was a time when there was a family. There was a father, and there was a mother, and there were children. And everyone knew what the father did, and everyone knew what the mother did, and everyone knew what the children did. And to paraphrase Tevye, everyone knew who they were and what God expected from them. Everyone knew what their role was. And a kid does not dictate to his parents. I used to say this when I was a kid, When you were growing up, when I was growing up, you never told your parents no. There was no such a thing. Not twice. Because the second time you wouldn't have any teeth, And there was an attitude of, you understand who the parents or who the kids are. Today, the social contract is broken down. And parents tell kids something, and kids are like, no, I'm not gonna. You can't make me. You can throw me out. I got places to go. And parents are just like stunned, at least if they're in my age group. They were like, didn't you get the memo? Like, I'm the parent, you're the kid. We tell you what to do, So now everything's negotiations, and we have to discuss it, and then we'll come around. Because there's a breakdown. Now, that to be fair, that's the Mishnah in Saita. that the family is going to collapse. The assumption that has existed for most of human history, that there's a parent and there's a child, and the parent tells the child what to do. And that's why so many of the chinuch svarim are not helpful in our generation, because they all work with the assumption there are parents and there are children, and parents tell children what to do, and the children listen. So the only question is what you should tell them, how you should tell them. But the basic assumption that there's a parent and there's a child goes without saying. Today we're flying without a flight plan, because that basic assumption is broken. And so I blame my parents, because that's what children are supposed to do. What do I mean? My father grew up with hunger in the Depression. He didn't go to World War II because he was deaf in one ear, so they didn't take him. But he grew up poor to the point where there was no money. He dropped out of school in 9th grade to go and work to help support his family. He built a business. He built a family. He had 6 boys. He supported them. He took care of them, and it was a given. That's what you were supposed to do. But because he grew up with such hardship, he wanted his children to have a better life than he did. Now, don't get me wrong. I grew up with chores. All my brothers did. My brothers, for the most part, went into my father's business and worked in the flower shop. He brought me in a few times and then asked me, do me a favor, stay home and help your mother, because you're just too incompetent to do this. So I learned how to cook and how to clean and how to shop, and I was able to pull a shopping cart behind me on my bicycle. I'd go shopping and pull the entire shopping cart back behind me with one hand. Niskatno Adoris. My brother Gedalia, when he was growing up, and he would do the shopping, he could steer with his feet and pull 2 shopping carts behind him. I wasn't ad kedei kach. I didn't have that much skill, But I'm one of 6 boys. There were no girls, so there was no gender-appropriate jobs. So, I morphed into a girl, and I did all the housework and things like that, those kind of things. But everybody pitched in. There's no such a thing. Today, you can see children. When I say children, I'm not talking about 3-year-olds. I'm talking about teenagers sitting on the couch while the cleaning lady is vacuuming and asks if they could pick up their feet so they could vacuum underneath, and they roll their eyes like, oh my gosh, I don't get a break around here. But the fact that there are chores or obligations, or you're part of a family and everybody has to pitch in, many places that's not there. Why? Because my parents brought us up with a sense of entitlement. They didn't have to. So we brought up our kids with even less of a sense of entitlement. And so, a simple phenomena, which anybody will tell you about. It's very hard to find babysitters today, because nobody wants to babysit. What for? I'll just ask my parents for money. There was a time when parents would say to kids, listen, you want to do this, you want to do that, make your own money. My brothers would go out in the winter and shovel snow. They would go out in the spring and summer and cut grass for people. Save up their money if they wanted to do something. Girls would babysit. Find some other way that people would have a paper route. But today, why should I do anything? I'm totally entitled. So I have time to do nothing but sit on my phone, make TikTok videos, and see how much attention I can get for myself. So there's this phenomena in Europe, and it hasn't hit America yet to the best of my knowledge, where these teenagers maybe they're 20-something, but not more than that, will go into a museum and throw paint on masterpieces. These people can't make a masterpiece. They can't do anything for the most part except wreak havoc. And then they say, stop oil. Or they'll glue themselves to the ground, to stop traffic or whatever it is. Why? Because we want you to stop the environment. Well, I don't like what you're doing with the environment. Or they'll start attacking people because we're pro-Palestinian. I saw a clip. It's old, but I saw a clip where Jerry Seinfeld, who's not shy about his support for Israel, was doing a show, and some of these protesters showed up. And his security took him out, but he says, the protesters are back. Guys, you don't get it. You're in the wrong place. Up here, you want to be up here. This is where it's happening. This is where we could do stuff. No one's listening to you. You're just making noise. You're not being very effective. You don't get it. You want to be on the stage. You don't want to be out there. He goes, and I don't know who your sponsors are, but you realize you just gave a lot of money to a Jew. How is that supposed to help your cause? But who are these people? They're teenagers, they're college students, and they feel entitled to do whatever they want. And if it means interrupting somebody who's speaking, we can do it. And if it means shooting the guy who's speaking, if I don't like it, we can do it. And if we talk about knocking over somebody's table who's giving out stuff, or chasing Jewish students into the library, we can do it. Because no one's ever told them no. And somehow they have this impression that they have the power to do whatever they want and they don't have to listen to anybody smarter than them. Now, okay, that's always been a situation, right? Mark Twain, he said, when I was 17, I thought my father knew nothing. And when I was 21, I was surprised how much the old man learned in 4 years. I once heard from Rabbi Orlofsky, he says, the reason people's hair turns white is so you know who to speak to get advice. Because, there's wisdom with experience. There are things that you can get with time. And the sense of entitlement that I know when I'm just a dumb kid, and I'm in a position to make decisions, and we live in a society that empowers these incompetent people to make decisions. For example, an elementary school boy says, I think I'm a girl. And they say, oh, that's great. Okay, we're going to start doing surgeries on you. We're going to start giving you medications. We're going to start doing all kinds of stuff to you because you decided you're a girl, but you're a kid. As somebody pointed out, if a kid in school goes to the nurse and asks for an aspirin, they have to get permission. But you're going to start giving all these drugs to kids because some kid said, I think I'm a girl. I heard this one comedian, he said, when I was a kid, I told my parents I'm a pirate. I'm so happy. They didn't cut off my hand, give me a hook, cut off my foot, give me a peg leg, and blind me and give me an eye patch. Because I really thought I was a pirate. Come on. The Gemara says, back in Gemara times, that a man is required to support his son until he's old enough to make it on his own. How old is that? 5. If he's a little slow, 6. Right? But by that point, you sit him down and you say, son, you're ready to go out in the world and make your fortune, find your own way. Good luck. I hope to see you on the holidays. When I tell this over to audiences today or in a shir, people are horrified. And they say, well, it's different today, right? And I said, yeah, it's about 40, 45 before you expect someone to, stand on their own. I don't know in America, but here in Israel, very often the way it works is a couple gets married. The first Shabbos, they go to his parents. Next Shabbos, they go to her parents. Next Shabbos, they go to his parents. Next Shabbos, they go to her parents. And they do this until one of their children get married and expect to come to them for Shabbos. Now they have to stay home and make Shabbos because now their kids are going to come to them. But 5 or 6. So we expect our parents to take care of us, and yet at the same time we think we're a baradeya. We think we're intelligent enough to be able to make decisions, not just for ourselves, but for society. There were all these interviews that took place during the Palestinian protests, all kids. And they would go into and they were all chanting, from the river to the sea. And they said to them, which river? Which sea? Nobody knew. River to the sea. I think the part that for me, I could not wrap my head around was they had these videos of where they put up pictures of the hostages and these college students are ripping them down. I saw videos of this. And every now and then they'd be engaging them and say, why would you rip down the posters? These are people who are being held captive. Why are you ripping them down? They didn't have an answer. It's just, that's what you do. You rip down the postage of old men and babies who are being held hostage. And you have to rip down their pictures? How does this make any sense? And the answer is, because before Mashiach comes, the children think that they are in charge. And therefore people don't have to respect their parents. Kim smear. Everything's coming to me. My father had a florist in nursery, and one time one of my brothers was emptying a truck with 50-pound bags of soil, rather labor intensive. And he's emptying out the truck, and my father comes by and he says, you need a hand? My brother says, yeah. He goes, look at the end of your arm. And he walked away. My father could say that because nobody was there for him. His father didn't take care of him. His father didn't give him anything. Everything he did completely on his own, and that's how he looked at life. You got to make your own way. And today, people expect that I have to get everything. I've told this story, I'm pretty sure, in the past, but I was teaching Mesilas Yesharim to Shana Bet in a yeshiva here in Yahrtzeit. Shana Bet, it's the second year already of Beis Medrash. And I say, I said, in first year, I translate the beginning of Mesilas Yesharim loosely and frankly not honestly. I usually say, Ma chavaso ba'olamai, why are you alive? But that's not literally what it means. What it means is, Ma chavaso ba'olamai, what do I owe God in this world because He created me? And the guy says, I don't owe him anything. He chose to create me, and now he has to take care of me, but I don't owe him anything. So I said, well, according to that logic, you don't owe your parents anything. He goes, no. My parents chose to have me. Now they're obligated to take care of me. I said, wow, so if I was your parents, I would say, I obviously made a terrible mistake and I'll fix it right now. He says, no. Once they chose to have me, then they have no choice but to take care of me. I said, wow, I wish I knew that your parents would produce this kind of a miserable ingrate, because then I could have gone back in time and told them, don't have these children. What for? They're total kafui tov, which, by the way, as Rashi says, is what Adam Arishon, the first Avera, was, is that he was kafui tov. And they have no appreciation. There's nothing. It's nothing. Your parents were stupid for having you. And you're an inspiration. I mean, you should be the poster child for birth control. You know what I mean? Like, a person who meets you would walk away and say, gee, I would never have children. Look at this miserable ingrate who turns around after his parents gave birth to him and raised him and spent all this money on him. He turns around and spits in their face and says, I don't owe you anything. And you don't even realize what a terrible person you are. That's the amazing thing. And when we do that to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's the same exact thing. HaKadosh Baruch Hu created us and gave us a world and takes care of us, and we don't feel like we owe him anything? I'm pretty sure I mentioned this once upon a time. Rabbi Bullman was talking about the phenomena of kids going off the derech. And for no good reason. For no good reason, honestly. You can go and look at it, and everyone can give 100 different answers, but there's no good reason why they decided to rebel against their parents. And Rabbi Bullman said, if you see something happening all over the world at the same time, you know that it's a gezerah min hashamayim. Now, Rabbi Moshe Shapiro said this also, but he gave a hezber why. Because the Gemara in Bracha says, why is the kapitel of Tehillim that discusses Avshalom next to the kapitel of Tehillim that talks about Gog and Magog, when all the nations of the world will turn against God? So the Gemara says, because in case you think that all the nations of the world would never turn against their Father in heaven, I'll show you a child who turned against his own father. Not just turned against his father, but his whole claim to the throne is, my father was king. And he sets out with an army to kill him. That's what you learn from Avshalom. And says with Moshe, the siman that we're in the zman of Gog and Magog is you see Avshalom and kids who rebel against their parents for no good reason. Mafchid. Mafchid. And so you find a lot of people, I won't say a plurality or a majority, but you meet a lot of people, much more than it should be, who either say, I'm not going to get married, and if I do get married, I'm not going to have any kids. What for? Because they'll turn 18 and then say, I don't owe you anything. You've never done anything for me. Just give me. You owe me because you chose to have me. Well, that was a mistake. And it's sad. It's a sad reality. But I meet people. Unfortunately, the divorce rate has gone up in the frum community, and I meet people who are like, I'll get married, and then, turn out I married the wrong person, and she'll take all my money. So, I don't need that. You hear it in the secular world a lot, but to hear this from people? Because everything's breaking down. There's a general breakdown of society. Now, the Medrash says that the Dor HaMabul could have either been destroyed by the Mabul, or they could have been Makabel the Torah. Why? Because when you destroy the Tzura and you're left with just raw material, you can make something else. I watched a potter once. Yeah, he was explaining to us pottery, and he takes the potter's clay on the potter's wheel, and he goes and he makes this very lovely bowl. And he says, this is what potters do. And then he mushed it all back together and said, now I'll make a pitcher. Yeah. And he says, until you fire it in the kiln and you make it solid, it's just chaymer. And chaymer, you can give it any tzura that you want, any image that you want, any form that you want to make out of it, you can make out of it. And so, in order to take on a new form, you have to reduce things to chomer, to raw material. We went down to Egypt and we were slaves and we had nothing. Everything was broken down. We worked from early in the morning till late at night. We saw our children being slaughtered for their blood for Paro to bathe in. We saw babies being used as bricks in the wall. We saw all the terrible things that were taking place. And we were broken. We were reduced to chomer. That's the pasuk. Mitzrayim is a kur barzel. What's a kur barzel? It's where you melt the metal so it can take on a new shape. And then you pour it into whatever form you want. And once it's taken on that shape, you'd have to put it back in the kiln and melt it down again. And that's why the Mabul wasn't Aish, right? Stone was destroyed with fire. It melted everything. Everything turned into mush. Everything disintegrated. The world was only chomer and no tzura. It had no form. And then it had to be recreated with a new form. So we came out of Mitzrayim, we were only chomer. That's why we came to Har Sinai in 7 weeks, and we were able to become the Am Hashem because we were just mud. And now we could take on a new form and become the people of Hashem. I've mentioned this beforehand. Yeah, the Medrash says Hashem went to all the other nations and he says to Yishmael, do you want to accept the Torah? And he says, I don't know, what does it say? It says, Lo Signov. He says, how could it be? The Torah says, I'm a Ganav. Yad B'kol V'kol Yad Go. The Torah says, I'm a Ganav. And he goes to Edom, Esav, and he says, do you want the Torah? He says, I don't know, what does it say? He says, don't kill. He says, the Torah says, Al Char B'chatichya. You live by your sword. The Torah says, I'm a murderer. A good gezak. No, it was a good point. He says I'm a murderer. He says the Torah says it. You're right. But if you're prepared to be makabel the Torah, it will turn you back into protoplasm, into the lowest form, into straight chaymer, and now you could be rebuilt as anything you want. And all the impurities will be burnt out, and everything will be there, and you could start over and take on a new shape. So we could come to Har Sinai and say Na'aseh v'nishma and become the people of Hashem, who we were not when we went down to Mitzrayim. We had to be burnt down into our essence. For example, one of the things Yosef was upset about with his brothers is that they were saying to the Bnei Bilhah and the Bnei Zilpah, since your mothers were slaves, really you should be our slaves. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu understood that given enough time, 2/3 of Klal Yisrael would have enslaved the other third, based on this principle. So I send you down to Egypt, and you all become slaves. Now none of you have any claims. And now we start over again. And that's That's the power of what can be done. So the only good news I have is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to bring the Mashiach and give us a whole new tzura. I heard this story. I don't remember who the Rebbe was. I'm terrible with my Rebbe names, and I apologize. And I'm sure some of my Hasidic listeners, of whom I have many, will write in. Yeah. I'm always surprised when I meet Hasidim who listen to the show, and I'm talking about Hasidim whose first language is Yiddish. You know what I mean? But they like to follow this. They get a kick out of me. But I heard this story that one Tisha B'Av, it's in the afternoon, and it was someplace in Europe where Tisha B'Av goes out very late, Mistame, and the Hasidim are bored. They're bored. So they decide to have a little fun. And they set up like this little trap. So when someone came into the base medrash and they'd step into this little loop, they'd pull the rope and they'd dangle him upside down by his foot. This is what they were doing while they were waiting for Mincha on Tisha B'Av afternoon, because they're bored already, hungry and bored and tired, and they need a little laugh. Anyway, through poor planning, the Rebbe came in, and they grabbed him by the leg and hanged him upside down. And when they realized it was the Rebbe, of course, it was like, where's this, and they take him down and untie him. And the Rebbe just looks at them, doesn't say a word. And he goes over to the Aron HaKodesh, and he says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what are you waiting for? These are the people you think are going to bring the Geula? They're so far gone, it's finished. You might as well just bring Mashiach already, because there's nothing left here to work with. Now, that was years ago. As a wise man once said, we already hit rock bottom and we started to dig. So when you think things can't get any worse, Klal Yisrael manages to push it back another level. Dig down more. And you'll find from people putting on their social media a pride flag. What's going on? What's going on? I can only paraphrase the Rebbe and say, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, there's no point. There's nothing left. We have disintegrated into Chaimer. The fact that schools have to deal with kids who are so mechutziv, that parents have to deal with kids who not just yell at them, hit them. I see it all the time. I'm talking about little kids get upset at their parents and they just smack them. Wow. Trust me, I never would have done that with my dad. But that's what it is. Or they say, shut up. Everyone thinks it's so cute, Disintegration. It's unbelievable. So that's why when I see Elazar and Yehuda sponsoring an episode in honor of their parents because they want to show their appreciation, that means that's where we're supposed to be. That's what it is. There's a time, I've mentioned this in the past, but it's just amazing. There were 4 mitzvahs given at Morah. Yeah. There was Dinin, which is Nezikin. There was Shabbos. There was Paraduma. And there's Kibbut Av V'Eim. But Rashi only quotes 3. He leaves out Kibbut Av V'Eim. And the Maharal says, because there are different categories of mitzvahs. There are Chukim, there are Mishpatim, there's Edus, and that's of course Shabbos and is Edus, and Paraduma is a Chok, the ultimate Chok, and Nezikin is Mishpatim. Yeah. Or you could look at it as one is the breadth of Torah, which is Shabbos, and one is the svara and depth of learning, which is Nezikin. And and the paraduma represents the side. But there's a fourth category, which he calls mitzvahs tivis. And he says, every child wants to honor their parents. It's built into the human experience. And that's why when the Gemara wants to learn a case of Kibbud Avim, how to do it, it brings a story of Dema ben Nesina, who is not Jewish. And I heard somebody say, you see, from this you can learn midos from a non-Jew. Rabbi Shapiro said, you see, from this you can learn Kibbud Avim from a non-Jew. Because that's part of the human experience. Everybody understands that. Children naturally want to be machabed their parents. And we live in a society that's destroyed it. There's an organization of mothers. One of them was just sued for libel in somewhere in the Midwest, and they just won their case. Yeah, I mean, they have. I forgot, but the slogan of the organization is, "I don't co-parent with the government. They're my kids, not yours. You don't tell me what to teach my children. That's not your job. Your job is to teach them how to read, how to do math, history. Your job is not to give them values. It's my job to give my children values." And we live in this kind of a society of destruction. So this is what I was thinking about, what I'm now calling the Greta Thunberg effect, and people throwing paint on masterpieces, and people gluing themselves to the floor, and all just stupid kids. TikTok videos who think that they know everything because they can get people to listen to them. There's no evidence that you know anything. Which river, which sea? And you're out there protesting. Okay, well, my producer sent me an appreciation comment, which I always like to share, because I want you to know that your comments really mean a lot to me. The chizuk that you give really makes me keep doing this. I'm doing this for 6 years already. It's a long time. We're over 300 episodes. When I started this, it never occurred to me that I could talk for 300 hours straight. Turns out I can, So, thank you, Rabbi Orlofsky, for all the chizuk, Torah, and joy that you spread throughout Klal Yisrael. Thank you. It's amazing that they don't invite me to any of these important conventions and things. Except Project Inspire. They're my friends. Anyway, may you continue this habratzas Torah ad bias goyel b'meher b'yameinu. Amen. I just discovered your show, and I really enjoy it. I am a teenager, and I am burnt out from the Beis Yaakov system. Yikes. You've come to the right place, because we're all a bunch of burnouts over here. I'm cynical enough that I can revive the spark of fire in everybody, because everyone says, at least he's telling the truth. You know what I mean? I will not sugarcoat it for you. Welcome to the Rabbi Orlofsky family. Yeah? You gave me hope that there are some real people out there who are not just repeating lines they heard in seminary. I never heard anything in seminary. I said things in seminary. Yeah? Good morning, Reb Dovid. I love your podcasts. Yours is the only podcast I could never miss, no matter how busy I am. Me too. It's the only one that I'm always making sure to do. As a side note, I really wanted to share that I really missed the Motzi Shabbos Shiurim on the Parsha. I don't know. I'll tell you what happened. What happened is, when I first started doing it, there was a request in the neighborhood that I should do something for the neighborhood, and I did. And I had literally hundreds of people coming. And as time went on, it dwindled. one of the only 3 English words that start with DW. It dwindled. You can think about the other 2. You can put them in the comments if you figure them out. Anyway, and so after a while, it was reaching the point where like I would get up there and it was like, thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you. I realized I didn't have to have it in a shul. I could just do it in a phone booth. But there aren't any phone booths anymore, I just realized. But anyway, I don't know where Superman changes. But so that's why I stopped it. But recently, someone told me, I don't want to mention the organization, that there's an organization that said they would like to revive it and sponsor it and put out, refreshments and things and make a whole Motzi Shabbos out of it. If that happens, then everyone knows I'm always happy to talk. Yeah. I don't know any speaker who comes close to your amazing Parsha Shiurim. You'll notice that most of my Parsha Shiurim are based on Chumash and Rashi. And I always try to go through Chumash and Rashi every year. And every time I see a Rashi, I very often am inspired. And most of my Shiurim are based just on Chumash and Rashi because it's there's so much there, right? How does Rashi, the first Rashi in Torah, begin? Yeah. Amr Rabbi Yitzchak. How does it end? Le'enei Yashikoicha Masher Shibarta. I don't know who pointed it out, but the first letter of the first word in Rashi is Aleph, and the last letter in the last word is Taf, because Rashi has everything from Aleph to Taf. Cool. Anyway, I'm familiar with many speakers that speak in English, Yiddish, and Hebrew. Besides your skillful speaking and master delivery that you practice with your weekly podcast, the Rabbi Orlofsky show as well, the Parsha Shiurim is so unique, creative, and out of the box. Thank you. And I want to tell you an interesting story. One of my first Parsha Shiurim that I ever gave, when I was getting a very big crowd, my good friend Chanukh Teller came. And he started coming regularly to my Parsha Shiurim, and he says, I was so impressed by that Chiddush. And it was my own Chiddush. And a yeshiva guy came up to me and said, that's a great idea. Who says it? I said, I do. You can't say that on your own. So why not? You can't. You can't. You have to have a Makor. I said, my Makor is Rashi. I told you Pshat no Rashi. What's wrong with that? You can't, yeah? So, Baruch Hashem, I'm too stupid to know what my limitations are. I have a few Talmidei Chachamim friends that I check things out with before I speak publicly, And I remember I was going to say a particular idea, and I said to him, can I say this? And he said to me, you can say anything. I said, good enough for me. He says, I wouldn't say it, but you can say whatever you want, So, Baruch Hashem. So thank you very much, everybody, for all of those wonderful, warm wishes. And that's it for this week. If you want to find out more about the show, you can go to my website, RabbiOrlofsky.com, where you can sponsor an episode. We're almost out of sponsors. You can sponsor a Parsha in 5. We don't have any sponsors. You can sponsor the new question and answer series that we're doing, that we started to do in the form of shorts, where I am giving a short answer, which is quite an accomplishment because I used to teach in a seminary and I used to give short answer tests, and I don't mean to generalize, but these girls did not understand the concept of short answer. They wrote everything they could possibly think of under short answer. I had to switch to multiple choice, which I do not like, but I just couldn't mark short answer, But I don't like multiple choice because it's nifka in my midas ha'emes, because you have to come up with 3 answers that sound like they're right and are really false. I don't like to do that, I like to try to be honest. But short answer, question answer, we need sponsors for that so that we can keep that going. You could sign up for one of my online shiurim. I still have 3 of them. I have a ladies' Masil Shashar. I have a men's Daf Yomi, and I have a men's and women's share on Tefillah on Sundays. We're in Kriya Shema. And you can submit a question, you can leave a comment, and we will try to get to them. We fell so behind with the question and answer. That's why we wanted to start the question and answer series like that. And that's it for this episode. Until next time, I am Rabbi Orlofsky, and this has been the Rabbi Orlofsky Show.
It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Torah and Simcha, ready to go. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Knowledge and wisdom will help you grow. Lots of fun in every episode. And we don't have to rhyme. No, we don't. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show on RabbiOrlofsky.com. Torah, anytime, YouTube and more. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Torah and Simcha, ready to go. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Till next time, till we meet again. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show.